So can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How do you deconstruct your own beliefs and faith while being a pastor?
That's an amazing question. And the first thing that is needed is a safe space. If it's not a safe space, you can't do it. And I've talked to pastors who have said that, like, I am questioning this. I don't believe this anymore. I've rejected this, but I can't tell my church that because everyone would leave or I would get fired.
You're listening to the Liminal Living podcast, a resource of practices and perspectives for those in dark nights and deconstruction.
Well, Aaron McConnell, we've known each other for, I was pastor at Shiloh, so probably we're going on 12 years now.
Well, yeah, I was going to say 12, 13.
12 or 13 years now. Now, you had to be a big jerk and move to Colorado and leave me here in Michigan without you. But yeah, we've been like hanging out and deconstructing together for a long time, a very long time. So do you recall that moment when you walked in that Bible study?
I do. I do.
You remember that too?
I remember you were teaching the Bible study, and I was trying to dig in and find a direction from kind of being directionless. And you and Kendall Harder, my goodness, I mean, it couldn't have been with a better group of people.
So I didn't say anything dumb in that Bible study? You're like, okay.
I'm sure you did, but I was too dumb to know.
That is a great perspective to hold right there. Well, I remember that, and kind of my first impression with you is here's someone who's real hesitant about the faith, and for probably very good reason. And like those were my first impressions. And so I was like a magnet. I was like, I got to let this guy know that I'm not what he might think I am as pastor, and this church isn't about that and all that kind of stuff. And then that's kind of like where it all started, where we hung out. Yeah. And we've been talking deep questions and all that kind of stuff for a long time. And I thought, like, we can have a conversation here about some of those deep questions, and they'd be helpful for some folks who are going through some dark nights or deconstructions themselves. So thanks for being on here.
No problem. I've got questions. I don't have all the answers.
Yeah, the questions are the best, though. The questions, once you get the answers, then you're a jerk because you're like, no, here's the answer, and I'm going to like shove it down your throat. But the questions, those are the cool things. You're crafting the best question. So could you kind of just give us a little bit of a background as to why you may have walked in those doors really hesitant about faith?
Sure.
And like, what's your roots? What's your spiritual roots as a kid?
So I was brought up right around the same area where you live. I went to a very fundamental Baptist church, and I went K through 8 to the Christian school that was along with the church. And it didn't take me long to kind of figure out to come up with my first question is either God is really small, or I'm struggling to, take what's being taught from the pulpit. And what it was is very exclusionary. It was, we're Baptist, we're doing it right. The Baptists in town have it completely wrong. And it was almost to the point of ridiculous. We couldn't go and hang out with the Baptist church in town. And so I was 13, 14 years old and going, what is this all about? I don't understand it. Am I just that lucky to be born into this faith where we're right?
Oh,
and so it was an early age where I said, I've got questions. And one thing you didn't do in my church is ask questions. If you were perceived as, doubting, of course it's a sin. And any question, if it wasn't the straightforward, how does this story go and what does it mean, turned out to be, I mean, you're almost heretical. I mean, so it didn't take me long. High school, I kind of started stepping away from church a little bit more, testing my parents' boundaries of how hard they're going to push me to go. College, I joined a fraternity my first semester freshman year, and my brother-in-law was a deacon at that church, and we were sitting at a family dinner, and he said, "Hey, you've been removed from membership of the church." And I said, "Okay, why?" "You took a secret oath." And I'm like, I'm 18 years old. I'm like, what does that mean?
What is a secret oath? I don't even know.
Yeah, they didn't even try to discuss it with me. It was all just cut and dry. You're done. You're no longer part of our church. And I was like, okay. And so that was kind of my childhood and, you know, through my college days. And at that point, I was just kind of like, you know what? Church doesn't want me. I don't want it. Church doesn't need me. I don't need it. And so I went away from the church for a long time. I mean, I would say from 1992 or 3. What did you call the Christians that just come to church on Easter and Christmas?
That's the Creasters.
Yeah, that's what I was from about 92 to 96. And then got married in 97. I would go occasionally to a Lutheran church with my wife. And I was really just not interested anymore in religion or organized religion, I guess I'd say. Still considered myself a spiritual fella, but just not. I didn't buy into the church. So then I got married in 2009 again, number 2. And she went to Shiloh. And so she had an introduction there, and I went there and I listened to Kendall Harger preach, and he's the first pastor I'd ever heard preach out of a place of love. And I'm like, this is interesting to me. Something's different. And so that kind of drew me back in to the faith. And you've known me for a few years now. I don't do much halfway. Mm-hmm. So when I was drawn back in, I was, okay, I'm doing this. I'm going to be into Bible study and I'm going to learn all I can. And so I was part of Forgotten Man Ministries, went to the jail every week. Soon after that, I went through my second divorce, which that really shaped me too. I remember sounding off to you a lot during that time. Mm-hmm. And I would say during that time it was, you know, I felt like you do everything right, or, you know, you do everything as you follow the prescription and you do everything that you're supposed to do. And still terrible things happen to you. After that point, I still hadn't thrown away the church. You and I were involved in Mosaic, which was a good idea. And then shortly after Mosaic started and it was, you know, getting up and running, I moved to Texas. And in Texas, I found a church. That's one of the first things I did. Tried to get involved, just couldn't. And then a couple years later, moved to Colorado. And I would say I'm still in about the exact same place. I've fallen into, you know, these churches that have, it just seems to be so super budget driven. You know, let's do all we can to, you know, pay high salaries, pay for a huge building, and I don't fit in with it.
Mm-hmm. What you said that you tried some places in Texas, you tried some places in Colorado, and is it all about like just the focus on like the butts in the budget? Is it like you walk in and you're like, oh, they just want a bigger building and more money and I got to get out of here? Or is it something else also in the mix, like something they're saying or some kind of ethos that you're getting out of the place?
Well, I guess one of my big things is when I go into a church and they've got all the answers, it's a huge turnoff to me. Because one, I feel absolutely dumb. Like, I don't understand this question. Oh, well, that's easy. It says it right here. Well, does it? And so, I moved to Colorado. We said, okay, I'm not going to try to go Baptist again. Let's try a community church here in this little town that I live in. And so I took my girlfriend at the time and her two stepkids and her two kids, my stepkids, to this church. And it started out just the feeling that I got when I walked in. It felt like I was 13 years old, at my Baptist church that I grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I leaned over to my now wife and I said, if I get up and walk out, you don't have to follow me. We're hitting on triggers here.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the first thing they do is they get up and they start talking and they said, it was Sanctity of Life Week. And they said, well, we're going to be outside of Planned Parenthood, and we're going to be picketing outside there. And if you want to, it's pretty low key during the week. If you really want to get into an argument and get in people's faces, come out on Saturday.
Holy cow.
And I'm like, what are we talking about here? I mean, at what point did Jesus say, go get in somebody's face? That was a one and done. We went to that church. We got out into the car and I actually apologized to the kids. And one of my biggest fears is that, these kids have to deconstruct. I mean,
mm-hmm.
that they have to be in the position that I'm in, and it would be my doing and my responsibility for bringing them there, introducing them to that. And I just, that scares me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like did you like walk out the door right after that? They because you said if I walk out.
I made it through.
You made it
I made it through. I was shaking by the end of it, but I made it through.
What else were you hearing that was like really getting on you?
Well, like I said, I think it's when people from the pulpit are 100% positive in what things mean. So they take scripture and they preach it through their lens with no ambiguity or room for a question. And that's I think people are reaching out for certainty, and I say, with the Bible, I can't do that. I can't reach out and go, oh, well, this is what's said. I understand it completely, and this is how I'm going to apply it. So that's, you and I talked earlier of being able to articulate where I'm at. I mean, this is one of those things where I want to believe that, the Bible is inerrant. I want to believe that. I just don't. I can't.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing, that's what I see in a lot of evangelical Christian churches. And I've tried my fair share around here too.
Mm-hmm.
And it always seems, it boils down to, we're going to guilt you. We're going to shame you for where you're at in your life. And we're going to put the fear of God into you.
Mm-hmm.
And I am so ultra sensitive to those three things just from my upbringing
mm-hmm.
that it's repellent to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's what I've seen in the churches around. There's always something. I've recently, I haven't gone for the last 2 weeks, but I found a little Nazarene church, which I always told myself. A little family background. My dad was Baptist. My mom was Nazarene.
Okay.
My grandmother said, "You cannot marry him because he's Baptist." That's what my grandma said to my mom about my dad.
Wow. And
so I always said, I'm never going to a Nazarene church. So it's actually where my mother and father-in-law attend, and they invited us on Easter was the first weekend. Mm-hmm. And so we show up there, and kind of a young pastor, young, like our age, young.
Oh yeah, we're like just spring chickens.
But he reminded me a little bit of Kendall Harder, where and how you preach. You preach out of love, and so it was good. It was nice and refreshing. He gave as he was up there talking, we're actually talking about Thomas. And so he's like, we're not calling him Doubting Thomas anymore, because that's every one of us. Every one of us would be like that, show me, mm-hmm. I'll believe it when I stick my, fingers in those nail holes. I think that is exactly like what I would be. And so, as he's preaching, he said, we're not going to call him Doubting Thomas anymore. He said, he got a bum rap with a nickname. We're going to call him like inquisitive. He wants to get to the bottom of it. He doesn't. He's not saying that. No, I can't believe it. But just that message there was like, okay, he kind of gets it a little bit as far as he's been through some pain and he's had some questions to even talk that way, to speak that way from the pulpit. Yeah. And so I can buy into the people who are real. It may be the fact that I've had friends that are pastors, and you, T, other pastor in Greenville, that I know who you are personally first, and then you're my teacher, preacher after that. And I know that if you miss a turkey that I call in for you, you may claim a 4-letter word.
Did I do that?
I know that about you. You're human. And so I just think that the relatability and the a pastor just being real means so much more to me than somebody who just says the party line. Mm-hmm. And that's what I feel like a lot of churches do, is the party line.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, I was at a church, and it was an interim position that I held, so I had to help them find a pastor. And so we're going through like all these resumes. It's a conservative church. So I was like, okay, we got to be open to conservative people that I might not approve of, because it's not about me. It's about this church and who they need. And I didn't get a say in, any of the hiring process or anything. I'm just guiding them through the process of searching, going through resumes and, interviewing and all that kind of stuff. So it's like I had a front seat for it. And I was like a coach for it, but I couldn't play the game. And this one resume just really stood out, and I'm like, oh, okay, they're probably going to pick this one. I think they're going to pick this guy. And they interviewed him. They really liked him. And I just got like this vibe off the guy. Like, I would not want to sit under this guy's pastoral care. I don't think that would be a good thing for me. And after a couple interviews, we sat down with the denomination leaders, and they're asking questions, and they said, does anyone have any hesitations? And I shot my hand up, and they said, okay, what's your reservation? And I said, well, he's really young. He hasn't suffered at all. So he's very prideful, and he will wound people because of that. And I just shut up after that. And I've kind of got to watch this church from afar on Facebook, and indeed, he has weaponized ideologies that are politically conservative and adopted them into the faith as parts of the faith. And it's like there's not even doctrine or dogmas anymore. There's social positions, and there's outrage. Mm-hmm. And he's weaponized it all, and he's using the church as his bludgeon for society. And it's just like, okay, I saw it coming, but not that much. Like, holy cow. And I did talk to somebody who ended up leaving that church and was just like, yep, I got wounded. And it's like, Howard Thurman says that you got to listen for the sound of the genuine, and you heard it in that pastor's voice, like, hey, he might actually have some humility here. He's got questions. He's got room for like conversation and discussion. And for some reason in like that fundamentalist place, there's no room for conversation and discussion and question. We just got to bludgeon people over the head with our viewpoints. And that doesn't work. Like, I mean, it never worked, but it got people in the door. But now it doesn't even do that. So right. It's like, why are we still holding to these methods that it's just weaponizing the faith is the worst thing we ever did with it. And some people pick up on it, like you. It was like, this guy's hesitant. When you walked in the door of the Bible study, I'm like, this guy's been hurt by a church somewhere, somehow. And it was just like, I didn't even speak a word to you. It just like the way that you walked in the room, you're just like holding yourself like, I don't belong here. I don't think I belong here, but I'd like to try. What is it in like going through the deconstruction process? Like, how did that affect relationships, like friends and family, church communities, spouses, kids? Like, has there been any like flack that you've, like you just can't toe the party line and now that person's upset with me? Or have you noticed anything in your relationships?
Yeah, I would say, my parents are, wow, they will say in one sentence, they'll say, man, you've really kind of opened our eyes to what we believe. And you question, I mean, they would say that I question everything. And so, my parents just visited me here on their way back from Texas to Michigan. They stopped by here. And my dad actually said, we were having a conversation about, as he's getting older, I mean, he's almost 80 years old now. We were talking about how he softened in his life. He was pretty hardcore. That's the way I'll put it. With me growing up, and it was a my way or the highway, and we're not thinking this is just the way that it is. And the way that he has, come through that is by asking some questions and leaving room for questions and actually thinking about things and not just saying, this is the party line, I'm sticking with it. I guess having been, if you go out in life and you get kicked around and beat up, what are your options moving forward? You're going to probably be a little bit softer. Like, hey, this can happen to anybody. This can happen to, my own son, me, who, went through my last divorce and spent time at Pine Rest. I mean, it was a bad situation that he found his son in that he never thought he'd have to. And, he's able to give grace now.
You mentioned that if there was any questions about the Bible, people need the assurance of inerrancy, that the Bible has to be inerrant. Like that whole understanding of the Bible being inerrant, the way that it's communicated now, was really only developed in 1920. And so it's like barely 100 years old. And it's like now like the standard truth of many fundamentalist evangelical churches. And what I actually like, when you dig into those churches that like hold those things so hard, what they're actually wanting is like they want their viewpoints inerrant. Like it's not necessarily the Bible that they think is inerrant, but their understanding of the Bible is inerrant. The way I see the Bible is inerrant. And so the way that they use the language and even the way they use that theology is not really around the Bible itself. It's around their understanding and their ideology. And then since they're like flagrantly like arrogant with that display, it draws people to them. And that's like what I saw during during the pandemic, when there was, mandates going down to shut down and wear masks and don't meet and all this stuff. And like those kinds of churches were the ones that were, just like, well, we're going to gather and we're not going to wear masks and we're going to do this. And those types of people, if you like get a megaphone out and just start yelling the conservative rhetoric, like your church would grow. Like in the middle of the pandemic, because they're like, oh, there's a church that's not afraid. There's a church that has faith. There's a church that, and like our church, we just said whatever the CDC is recommending is what we're doing, and we're going to take that out of our decision making process and hands. Mm-hmm. And I just remember like being so angry at churches that were just putting multiple people in a room without concern for transmission of a deadly disease, and then doing it in the name of someone who is, Jesus, who is love and life. And here they are like flagrantly in rebellion. And I was just like, wow, I was so mad, but I was also frustrated because their churches started to grow. And, they were like pulling these people to them that were like, they wanted that too. And it's almost like we need someone to be a jerk for us. Like, I don't have confidence enough to be a jerk, but my pastor is one, and I like that. He'll punch those dirty Democrats in the jaw. He'll get in the face of those Planned Parenthood people. I like that in a pastor. And that whole mentality is like blowing up in our faces right now. It's not working to actually do what Christ has called us to do in this world. It's tearing everything apart. And we're in a post-Christian society now. So all the things that used to work to get people in our doors of threat and shame and guilt, people are just like, you don't have authority to like tell me what's up anymore. That's a bygone era. And it's like these churches have then gotten mad about that, and the Christians have then gotten mad about that, and they're ready to like just attack. And that's what something does when it's on its way out. So can I ask you a question? Sure.
How do you deconstruct your own beliefs and faith while being a pastor?
Well, that's an amazing question. And the first thing that is needed is a safe space. If it's not a safe space, you can't do it. And I've talked to pastors who have said that, like, I am questioning this. I don't believe this anymore. I've rejected this, and But I can't tell my church that, because everyone would leave, or I would get fired, or all of those things. I am not in that scenario at my current church. I'm in a congregational church, and we're actually not creedal, we're covenantal. So how that works is we have 7 sentences that guide our belief system, but it is up to the individual to use the Holy Spirit to interpret those in the context of community. So it's all like neighborhood based. But someone can walk in and interpret one of those statements differently than me and still belong, because we're not creedal, we're covenantal. As long as you're committing to being in community with us and to hold your beliefs in a way that is non-damaging and weaponizing to the rest of the community, then that's upholding the covenant of love and support for one another. And I can't tell you, well, that interpretation is totally, wrong. My interpretation is right. And vice versa, the congregation can't do that to me. It's actually in my written, my written contract that says I can't get fired for what I preach on. So I have a safe space that I landed in. I've been deconstructing, since I was 7. I'm walking around Sam's Club. You remember Sam's Club? I'm walking around Sam's Club and marveling at the fact that I am a conscious being in existence. And I'm 7. And then I'm looking at myself, I'm like, what 7-year-old thinks these thoughts? I'm 7. I shouldn't be marveling at consciousness and existence. Right. But I was. And I've just been that kind of person who asks questions, deeper questions. And, when I tackle the Bible, I tackle okay, here's the understanding that, I was handed. What does it really mean? What's really going on here? Let's look at the culture. Let's look at the context. And then, pastorally, I then deliver that in a way that, how can we then do this here among us in a way that is helpful to all of us to making a just and inclusive society? And so that's how I can do it as a pastor. Is I don't have many dogmas left. Very little dogmas left. And I'm totally comfortable with that. I don't need them anymore. I don't want them, actually. I know how to authentically express my faith and love in this neighborhood context that I'm in. And that's really all I need to do. A lot of churches aren't safe spaces to deconstruct, because as soon as, like you said, I have a question, I'm now a heretic. It's I didn't even have an answer. I just had a question.
Right. It's a question, right?
I just had a question, and now I'm ousted from the community. And that's how they protect the dogma, is that they drug everything into the dogma box. We talk about there's dogma, which are the essential things that you believe that make you a Christian. There's doctrines that make you a type of Christian, like a Catholic or a Baptist or a Nazarene or whatever. And then there's things that you can argue about, and debate about within that denomination that you're not going to get kicked out of. And the fundamentalists just drug everything in the dogma box and said, my entire perspective is the way it ought to be. And then we use it as a weapon upon society to try and get it to conform to our understanding. And that's when we were the white majority in the country, we were able to do that and call ourselves a Christian nation and believe what we were, which I would say we weren't. But now that perspective is the minority, they either have to become more open and gracious and allow questions, or they have to become more combative. And I see churches going the other way and being combative instead of allowing the pain of, wow, we're in a post-Christian society. I'm not sure how I belong and fit, and if I actually have a place anymore in this society. Instead of like humbly going there, they're just like, no, we're going to take it back, and we're going to fight, and we're going to protest, and we're going to argue, and it's just like, man, there's nothing about that has like the character of Christ written on it.
So is this the first church? I mean, I met you at Shiloh, and then you were what do they call it, intentional interim, and you got on with that, and so you saw a lot of churches there, then thrive, right? And then the church that you're at. Is this the only church that you felt safe?
I would say I've developed as a pastor in my deconstruction, where like I come to realize, like, I don't come to discard a belief that I've had. I get to the place where I understand that I never had it, and I was only holding on to it to conform to the people around me. And I've become more and more comfortable letting those things go that I was afraid to say, I don't believe this anymore. I don't believe that anymore. I don't think this way anymore. And I think I've gained confidence as I've moved from church to church. So I don't think I've had to much like toe party lines when I go places, but through my own journey through deconstruction, I've now come into a safe space where I can do that without fear of getting kicked in the teeth. Like, I am just more confident in understanding, like, I never believed that. I never believed that the earth was 6,000 years old. I was just saying it because I didn't want to get in trouble, Yep. I never believed that, we should treat people in the LGBTQ community with disrespect and they don't deserve human rights and all this stuff. I never believed that. And now I've come to the place where, I can have a rainbow flag next to me in my office, right? Like, right. I'm finally getting to the place where it's just like, I'm tired of just toting any lines, and I really am just going to be me. And I'm going to be wrong about that. I will be wrong about that in things I say or do or whatever, but I will humbly accept correction and move forward when I'm wrong. And that's different. I will just express who I am in this moment, knowing that I'm not infallible and that I will need to be corrected. And I will humbly accept that correction and move forward. And that's kind of how I've deconstructed as a pastor, is just gradual. And from church to church, I have slowly awakened to the things that I can no longer hold on to. And that's what deconstruction feels like. It's like, I've held on to this thing, but I've never needed it. I never wanted it. And here it is. And now I'm going to drop it. Is it okay, guys? And then then your community tells you, no, it's not okay. Oh, okay. I'll just hang on to this a little bit longer then. And then people are getting tired of that and they just leave, and church doesn't have to be about that. Church can be about something entirely different, where it's like, our church is pretty small, and I like that. And we're in a small town. And so instead of trying to get the town to get into my church, and like, I have to convert everybody and save everybody and get everybody inside the building. It's like, no, our church plays a really important role in our neighborhood. And I want to help equip this church to function in that role in the neighborhood better. So we're not insular, we're like communal. And that then opens the door. People then is like, oh, I want to go to that church. And they do come to our church. And we've had new people been coming a lot more lately. And I don't know if we'll stay small, but they've been coming in the doors. And then it's like, oh, you want a place in this thing that we're doing in our neighborhood? And it's just a totally different way of doing church than invite everybody in and build a small personal Christian empire. And it's a little haven from the world. and everyone come inside here and we'll be safe from the evils of the world. And it's like, no, we're just gonna be in this town. We're a part of the town, and we have a function to play in this town, and this town will be better because we're in it, and we're open to using that role and not using fear and guilt and shame and manipulation to try and get people in the doors and get their money. It's like, if you want to come, you're more than welcome.
So when you talk about letting go of some of the beliefs you had, or, testing them out, and then feeling like you want to let go, is it just time in the deconstruction process that allows you to confidently move forward in that? Or was there or is there a certain event? I mean, I know you lost your dad. Was there a triggering event that said, you know what, I'm going to be me, and if I've got to apologize later, I'll apologize later?
I think, early on, we have a disabled son named Isaac, and he's 19, and he's opened my eyes a lot. It's goddamn hard to be caretaker, but he's opened my eyes a lot. Going through the pain and suffering of watching him suffer as a disabled person, surgeries and epilepsy and social ostracization and not fitting in, and just the suffering that I have watching him suffer as a disabled person has really opened my eyes to a lot of things. How most churches didn't welcome him and don't have a place for him. And if they did, it was like the back closet. It was like, oh, we have a special needs ministry. It's in the back room. You can go in there and watch from the TV. It's like, okay, so I guess that's something.
Right.
That was an we process. It wasn't an event. That's ongoing process. We lost our second son shortly after birth in 2005. And I was really pissed off at God. I'm like, I'm doing everything right. and that was in the midst of a really intense medical time with Isaac. And so it was just kind of like my understanding of God broke at that point. And it was kind of like, all right, it seems as though God's just going to do whatever God wants to do, and I just got to stay out of God's way. Like that was my understanding for a long time. Like, God just doesn't care. And if I just keep my nose down and keep plodding on, I'll stay out of God's way and it'll be fine. Because obviously prayer doesn't work, because we prayed a lot and it didn't do anything. So there was another point of my deconstruction. And I still really don't know what to do with the whole question of suffering, but I know that it at least has humbled me to know that I don't have all the answers. So going through a lot of pain early on in life, I was in my 20s, I think, when all that stuff happened. And being someone who's kind of, as a 7-year-old, questioning existence itself, and like marveling at consciousness, like I think those things just contributed to an intellectual curiosity more than an intellectual pride. I've had that too, but I've been more open to questioning things and not just spouting off dogma for dogma's sake, but actually why do we believe this, guys? Like, is this helping us? Is this true? Is this what the early church believed? Is it where did it come from? And then you learn where some of the beliefs come from, like an inerrancy of scripture came because the scientific revolution was changing how we saw the universe and God and expanding everything, and archaeology and like dating and history and all of this stuff started blowing open our minds about how we see the world and ourselves from the very small Christian one that we were able to control. And so in 1920, the Fundamentalists were started, and they, their first tenet was you have to believe that every word of Scripture is true and inerrant and literal, and because they had to protect that small little bubble of a world that they were in because it was falling apart. And here we are 100 years later, 13 years later, 103, sorry, my math's off, 103 years later, and people are still holding to that bubble version. And it's like, just let it pop. Like, you can be a meaningful, like, you can have meaningful participation in your neighborhoods and communities if you wouldn't think they were the enemy. Mm-hmm. And if you would just open your doors. Like, it's not those people out there that are the enemies and need to be converted to your way of thinking to get inside your walls. It's, you got to get your butt out of your pew and get into the neighborhoods and meet the people's needs. And like, I think that's something I'm coming to learn as a pastor, how to do better in my current role. And it's actually working. We're down to like 10 people in the pandemic, and we've really bounced back. And I mean, we're a small town, so it's not a lot of people to pull from, but you know, we've been filling up the pews again, and new people are coming, and like, I'm looking around, I'm like, I don't know 3/4 of these people. So I think that we got to figure out a different way to be the church, to operate as the church going forward. And I'm experimenting with some things now, and it seems to be working all right. So.
Well, I know this is kind of a biased opinion, but I think they're lucky to have you. One is that I think they're lucky to have somebody who, you know, has been kicked in the teeth by life a little bit. You know, you don't sit up there in your shiny suit and, you know, you're above the world's problems. I mean, you and your family have dealt with a lot. And so, you know, just like you said, I was mad at God. I mean, that brought up so many memories for me. I mean, you lived through some of them with me. You know, where I still, I mean, I would say that's where I started in my deconstruction of prayer, was my second marriage. I mean, I couldn't pray that thing healthy. Mm-hmm. You know, I thought I was doing all the right things. I thought I was praying the right way. I was confident, and you know, that prayers would be answered in a certain way, and they weren't. You know, I mean, I had a marriage fail, and you know, being a 2-time loser was a big deal to me. I mean, it was really, I mean, that took the wind out of me. And I mean, you were around during those times. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, mm-hmm. It was, but one thing they've got with you is that you've been kicked in the teeth, and you're still pressing forward and, you know, trying to figure out your faith and differentiating between where, you know, what you were given and what you have learned. And I would say that's exactly where I'm at now. Just you're a whole lot smarter than me.
I have a different way of knowing, that's all.
I could tell you more about garage doors than you'll ever want to know, but
you're in sales of garage doors, right? Yeah. Well, so I wouldn't call you a 2-time loser, by the way. Just want to go back and correct that understanding that divorce happened to you and it sucks, and you don't have to like it, but you don't have to label yourself.
Well, yeah, I'm 100 times healthier than when I last saw you face to face.
Yeah.
So I don't hold any bitterness anymore. I don't hold any. I mean, I'm in a great spot in life. I'd like to get this whole faith thing figured out.
Oh, me too. That would be great, and then we could fix everything.
Wouldn't it?
What is an understanding of spirituality that is helpful for you right now?
That's helpful for me now. I would say, just what I said earlier. You know, if I speak to somebody, I'll go a different way with that. What's helpful for me is to see people that profess faith, that they actually love people, that they are not coming down on LGBTQ, that they're, you know, that they have their faith, but they also have an understanding that they don't know everything. That's big to me. Just being real, being gracious. That's true spirituality to me. And you know, I struggle with. I don't struggle. I use that word, I think, because of my upbringing. And while I shouldn't struggle with it, I'm constantly listening to podcasts. So I'll listen to Rob Bell still. And I mean, I would say, in about, you know, When Did Love Wins come out? That was a eye opener to me. And if you think about my history, you know, not being able to ask questions, and that was a book of questions. Yeah. And I'm like, oh man, that is so refreshing that he's got questions the same that I do, and he's a pastor. You know, I've been introduced to Ram Dass, and I listen to his podcast once a week. You know, he's dead, but he's still got teachings that are out there that they still put out. Richard Rohr, you know, you introduced me to Richard Rohr and the Enneagram. And his teaching, while it's, you know, probably elementary to you, it's not to me. It's very heady to me.
It's not elementary. Richard Rohr, he's very simple, but it's not elementary. He's like, you can't delve the depths of that man's love and faith. It's a bottomless well.
He you know, I look at the way these guys, you know, every time I listen to Richard Rohr speak or listen to somebody who had spoken to him, same with Ram Dass, they'll say they exude love. They exude something different that, you know, you walk into a room with them and you feel something different. And I'm like, there's something to that. I really do believe there's something to that. And so, you know, spirituality, I combine it all. I combine it, you know, what I was handed and what I've gotten rid of and what I've still held on to, along with that new teaching that I've, you know, come to enjoy. That's where I find the most helpful spirituality with me.
I like that exudes love, because that's pretty much the point. You know, like, if God is love and we're supposed to be like God, you know, why wouldn't you want to exude love? And why would you instead want to exude arrogance and hostility? And we're going to go protest in front of the Planned Parenthood and get into these women's faces who are going through already traumatic things that they're going to walk through these doors. Like, there's no exuding love in that moment. There's exuding hostility and anger, and that's exuding love. I think that's great. And you do that. I mean, I've never felt judged in your presence. So,
well, and that's, I think I've been lucky with, you know, from day one, you allowed me to be me and have my questions. And you and I have talked about some deep stuff along the line. I mean, you'll leave me in the dust after about 15 minutes because of your education. But, you're always there to listen, and you have never once made me feel judged. And I can say that about very few people in my Christian walk. Is, I would say I'm not as confident as you when it comes to, like going to this new church. I know exactly what to be. I can put on the Christian face when I have to, or when I feel like I have to.
Yeah.
And, generally that's when I walk into a new church, or, I still struggle being me and not living the double life.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived the double life for so long growing up.
It's like second nature.
Oh, it is. You can jump right back into it. And, I'm lucky I've got a great wife. And she puts up with me, and my questioning. And, she said, it was the weekend, Saturday before Easter. And she's like, we're going to church tomorrow. And I'm like, no, we're not. And so we ended up going. You see how
yeah.
But it's a bigger conversation to me, and I make it into probably a bigger deal than what it is, of kind of what I've gone through and what I where I'm at now, and being very cautious about what I'm stepping into.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is, her parents are my in-laws are very non-judgmental people. They have their views, and they're pretty old school, but they're very educated people. Her mom was a she taught in a college. She was a professor for her career, pretty much. Very well traveled, and they don't have the small views of what I was brought up with. So while they may be old school, they're still a lot more gracious and loving than what I was brought up with. Not saying parents, and I came from a great family, but no, just like my church family growing up. While they kind of run it along the same lanes, they're completely different in that they're good at showing love.
Yeah, I think like fundamentalism is not necessarily a set of beliefs, but how you hold the beliefs. Like there's a fundamentalism that is seen in both conservative and liberal camps, and it's a weaponization of your ideas and ideals against someone else. When you hold your ideas as a weapon, you're a fundamentalist because you want to attack, and that there, I think that can be someone who's you come into the presence of someone who does not hold their ideas as a weapon, and you just feel safe. And when you come into a community of people who don't hold their ideas as a weapon, then you can feel safe. And I think a big reason why I feel confident where I'm at is because I'm in a safe space. If I walked into, if I had not found a church like this, I don't know if I would have been able to, I guess I don't know how much I would have been able to deconstruct myself, because it wouldn't have been the safe space to do it. And it would have still been causing inner turmoil inside of me, because it's still going to happen regardless. But if I have a safe space to do it, then I can I can do it without the fear that it's being done. Like it's going to be done. And then if you're not in a safe space, then that causes anxiety that it's happening. Oh my God, it's happening. What do I do? But if you're in a safe space and you don't have that anxiety, it's like, oh, this is going to happen. Anyways, the questions, the things that, I love Walt Whitman, this poet, American poet. And he said, to like disregard everything that insults your soul. It's a longer quote than that, but I can't do it word for word. But it pretty much says, question everything that you were taught in school, in church, in society, and disregard anything that insults your soul. And it's like, man, that guy was like deconstructing back in the 1900s, early 1900s.
Right.
As a poet. I think that's when he was living. I don't know. But yeah, those safe spaces, I hope that you find more of them, and larger spaces that are safe to ask questions in. And I hope you can feel confident that you don't have to weaponize your beliefs and conform to some standard that was handed to you, but just become who you are.
Yeah. Be a good place to be.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to hit stop recording because I still don't know how to close out a podcast, like officially. So I guess it's done.
Thank you for listening to the Liminal Living podcast. If you're interested in spiritual direction to help you navigate through your dark night or deconstruction journey, please check out our website, www.liminalliving.org. We will see you next week. Blessings.